Hello and welcome to the real world. Psych! Believe it or not, I am actually inside of a board game right now. Specifically, this one, Jetlag the Game's hide and seek board game. Now, this technically says on the box that it's a transit game, but that's not quite true. I would classify it as a board game. It's just that the board is so large they couldn't pack it in the box because it is the real world. That's the twist. If you're intrigued but you have no idea what Jetlag the Game is, it's a show here on YouTube and on the streaming platform Nebula that sees the recurring players Sam, Ben and Adam participating and competing in games of their own design, taking place, of course, in this real world of ours. And as a sort of companion piece to the season that they aired this winter, they released this product, Hide and Seek, the transit game that you can buy in order to play basically the exact same game that they played in that season, season 12. The basic idea of this game is that you're playing hide and seek. One team or player has to hide in one particular area while all the other players are hunting them down using deduction and questions from a menu of questions that is also included in the box. The hider does have to answer these questions honestly, otherwise it would be completely impossible to find them. But in turn, they get to draw cards off of the hider deck, which is also included inside. The hider deck has cards that will potentially allow the hider to extend their time by quite a lot. The quicker those seekers can find the hider or the hiders, the better, because the hiders win if they're the ones who hide for the longest time out of anyone. So this is a game designed to be played out and about in the real world, in any city, basically, or country, or region, or just the neighborhood of a city, using that area's existing transit network, such as buses, ferries, trains, probably mostly trains, or metros. So as a product, this is unique in basically every way. It's got cards inside, it's got dice inside, but the game here is probably gonna be like nothing you've ever tried before. Full disclosure, I haven't played this yet. Of course, I intend to do so, but as you can probably imagine, this takes a bit of planning and prep work. And on top of that, it also requires you to bring together 2 to 4 plus players that are willing to read through the quite thick rule book inside here. And of course, also spend money on stuff like transit tickets and all the other supplies you might need. I'm not gonna bury the lead here. I think this game fulfills a very specific niche, and it's not one you're gonna be playing all the time. Well, if it is, then I envy you, to be honest. It takes the right people, it takes a lot of prep work, and it doesn't say on the box, but it takes anywhere from multiple hours to multiple days to play, depending how ambitious you are. In this video, I'm gonna be, of course, looking at what's inside this box. I know I'm dying to know. And I'll be trying to answer the questions and concerns that I think people are probably likely to have before buying this game. Ultimately, we're trying to answer the question, should you buy Jetlag's hide and seek game? Either that, or for all the Jetlag fans watching, this will maybe be a cool look behind the scenes as to what is going on inside the games that they're playing on screen. Let's have a look. All right, what's inside this thing? Obviously a very small box. Everything is packed nice and tight in here, which is honestly good because this is supposed to be brought with you. I'm gonna unpack these things and talk through them a little bit. Right, so these are all the things that you'll find in the box, or at least these are the things that are in my box. We've got 6 dice that are used for various curses. The curses are found in these 2 decks, which are supposed to be shuffled together into one big hider deck. The box even includes these little elastic bands that I suppose are probably meant to go around the cards to keep them in place, which is nice. That's a nice little touch. Then for the seekers, there's this little notebook which shows all of the different questions that the seekers can ask. There's also a slight tiny bit of room to write notes for the answers that you got for asking those questions. And I suppose that is also the same space where you'll have to write the answer if you ask that same question again, which you probably won't want to do anyways. So yeah, this notebook is all grayscale. It doesn't really need to be anything else. The text in it is very tiny though. That's just part of this whole thing being very small and portable. Every 5 pages contains room to write down the answers or notes to all of the questions you might want to ask in a single round of the game, and then it starts over at the first category. So you can use this for the next round. And even if you end up filling out all these spaces, you can still just write down notes on your phone. This isn't really necessary other than its usefulness just as a tool for remembering all the different questions you can ask, and also remembering how many cards the hiders will get to draw in response to you asking this question. And then there's these 2 official rule books. These are the exact same rule books as far as I know. They're copies of each other, and this means you can give one to the seeker and one to the hiding team. There are a lot of pages in this rule book. Not a lot of the space is taken up by illustrations. A lot of the space is mostly taken up by different clarifications of the cards in this deck or the questions in this book. So the actual rule sets are shorter than it seems. Luckily, because this is a really, really thick and densely packed book. The text is readable. It's not quite as tiny as in this notebook. I'll give these rule books their own section of the video because I have some comments on them, and also there are some variants and different things in there I want to mention. Right now, let's have a look at these cards. Well, I'll start out by saying these cards are quite nice, they're good. The production quality, as with all these things, is good, and I think that's great because you're going to be hauling these around cities in your bag, so it has to be somewhat sturdy. Also, I will tell you that you will have to shuffle these cards yourself. They don't come pre-shuffled, and I don't know if anyone was expecting that. I'm going to partition these cards into different groups: time bonuses, curses. You'll maybe know all the ones. And you can have a look at the distribution. I'll tell you a little bit about the numbers. So the first kind of grouping of cards in the deck are these time bonuses. You can see there are just so many of the very worst ones, the 5-minute time bonuses that have become iconic already. Oh my goodness, there are so many of them. It looks like about half of the time bonuses in the game are 5-minute time bonuses. Then there are these 10-minute time bonuses, a couple of 15-minute time bonuses, 3 20-minute time bonuses, and 2 30-minute time bonuses. In the description of this video, I'll put a link to a spreadsheet someone on the Discord made where you can have a look at the exact number of every single type of card. But this is the rough distribution. About half of the cards in the deck are time bonuses. The other half of the cards, as you'll probably know if you've watched the show, can be divided into 2 types, the power-ups and the curses. Let's have a look at the power-ups first because they're simpler. They are also not sorted, so I could tell you there are 4 randomized question cards, 4 veto question cards, a bunch of these discard 1 or discard 2 and then draw 2 or 3, whatever cards. A couple of these are draw 1, expand your hand size by 1 cards, 2 of them are. 2 of them are duplicate another card, and one of them is the move card that has just such a long explanation on it as to what it does. You'll know about this card if you watch the show. It's an infamous one. This is potentially the most powerful one in the deck. There's only one of them, and it might be so powerful and so time consuming that you might want to leave it out of the deck entirely when you play the game for yourself. But again, let's get into variants and house rules later. And then the coolest of the cards, the different curses. Like these have a lot of text on them because these describe various tasks that the seekers will have to do if the hider decides to play these curses. And of course, the text on the bottom of these cards describes what the hider will have to do in order to activate them. There are a couple of these that were never seen on the show, such as Curse of the Labyrinth and Curse of the Overflowing Chalice. I don't think we ever saw these in the show at all. Curse of the Bridge Troll and Curse of the Egg Partner are 2 other curses that I don't think we've ever seen drawn or played in Season 12 of the show. Although, looking at the teaser for Season 13.5, we're going to see the Curse of the Egg Partner pop up there. But I will mention also that I remember at least 1 curse from Season 12 of the game that isn't in this deck of curses. I believe it was called Curse of the Frozen Spot. There might be a couple more curses that they used in Season 12 that aren't in this game. If I find out about any, I'll put them on the screen right now. The rest of the cards also includes a good amount of blank cards. These are cards that you can fill out with your own curses, your own time bonuses. You can make a 50-minute time bonus if you want to. Wow, that's a lot of blank cards. More than I expected. Right, I think that should be positively all that most people want to know about the contents and the cards in the game. There are about 100 cards that are playable, and then of course, just so many blank ones as well that you can use to make your own devious cursors. There you go. So, in a sense, this box comes with everything you would need to play a game of hide and seek, like they do on Jetlag the game, in your own town, or your own country, or your own region, or some region where you're vacationing. But in a very different sense, but also a very valid sense, it doesn't really give you everything you need. There are a number of other things that you will need to pack in order to properly play this game. First of all, because the game is played on a transit network, you will need day passes or tickets of some other kind for each of the people playing the game. Now, lots of cities, regions, and even countries will have day tickets or interrail tickets or whatever that you can buy pretty cheap and travel as much as you want for, say, an entire day or 2 or 3. So this is not necessarily going to bankrupt you, but you need to keep it in mind. This is part of the cost of playing the game. In fact, you have to pay this every time you play the game. Then, of course, one very important thing that is not in the box that you will need is a phone. That phone will then also need to always have an internet connection, as well as a camera, a tracker feature that the hider can use to track where the seekers are, as well as a map app that all the players agree to use for reference. And also, for some of the cursors, you might need a compass app, which most phones will have, as well as some way to randomly generate numbers other than the dice that come with the box. Another handy but optional feature that you may want to bring is a giant map of the entire play area that you decide to play in, as well as writing utensils for writing on the map, scratching out the places where the hider absolutely cannot be, as well as maybe, while you're at it, some blank paper for writing notes or for putting over top of your phone screen and tracing out lines in the shape of roads on the map near where you are. The manual also recommends that you bring snacks or something to drink, as well as a power bank or portable phone battery so that you can keep you and your phone powered up at all times. And while we're at it, you need to have some way of separately storing the pile of cards that you haven't drawn, the pile of cards that you've used, and your hand of cards. Keep them all separate somewhere in your bag. But apart from all the things you might need to pack, there really isn't that much prep work that you need to do in order to set up a game of this anywhere in the world, which I really appreciate about the game design here. The 3 main things that you're going to have to do is split up into teams that are going to take turns hiding and seeking. You're going to want to decide the exact area that you want to be in play, including what types of transit you're allowed to take and what stations you're allowed to hide at, because every place you hide has to be centered around some transit station. I would at the very least make a Google My Maps with a polygon on it that clearly defines the borders that we're working within, just so every player knows exactly the area of play. And last but not least, depending on how long you want your game to go on and how large your play area is, you need to pick a game size. And this is a choice that the manual equips you for pretty well. Basically, the game comes in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and depending on which one you choose, different time durations and different measurements and different questions will change. The numbers are going to be different. Some of the questions are only available in the larger games, but all in all, this I think is pretty well integrated. Like, you can easily see on the cards and by the questions which ones are for larger games only and which numbers you need to use for which games. It's all clearly marked with red, orange, and yellow numbers. And you just always need to pick the number that is the color that corresponds to the size of the game you're playing. Obviously, you can spend a lot of time like really meticulously defining the play area or making a really cool map for you to print out if you want to, but honestly, I think that the setup here is pretty manageable. The biggest hurdle is all the stuff that you need to collect and bring with you, mainly the other players. But if you're with someone who's also willing to sit through the rules and actually go and play a game of this with you, I think this could be portable enough to just bring with you on vacation and set up a game of it without doing all that much preparation before you leave home. Now, let's get into that rule book and answer some of the nitty-gritty, detailed rules questions that you might have, or at least that I was curious to see the answer to when reading that manual. And it's 4:45. Oh yeah. So, I mentioned before that the game comes in 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large, and depending on which one you choose to play, the game is going to be longer or shorter because certain revealing questions aren't going to be available to the seekers, and time bonuses and curses aren't going to be as effective on smaller game sizes. And while we're at different variants or versions of the game, I should mention that the team, the Jetlag crew, has just announced recently the new metric version of the game. It looks basically exactly like this version, except the black and the red colors are swapped. And then of course all the measurements are in metric units rather than imperial units. Every single number in this rulebook and on these cards is in imperial units in the version that I have. Be aware of that. It's really helpful to not have to swap your map apps and everything else to imperial units to play this game. Apart from that, I've also mentioned already that there are some subtle differences between this game that you can buy and then the game that they played on Season 12 of Jetlag the Game. The keyword there being subtle, because you really wouldn't notice it unless you're actively looking for it. It's mostly just cards that are missing or new cards that have been added to this game, as well as some small rules nuances. So I don't think it's going to be massively unbalanced if you simply play it like you've seen them do on the show. It won't break the game. Apart from that, there are also some experimental game variants in the final chapter of this rulebook. I know a lot of people will be very happy that they've outlined this variant of the game that is playable on foot or by car in case your city just doesn't have the transit density needed to play the base game. But of course this version then leaves out a bunch of questions and curses to do with transit lines and transit stations. And of course if you can walk or drive anywhere at any time, that also kind of removes some of the strategic choices with where to go at what time. That being said, I think the game is absolutely playable in this version. I can even imagine a version of the game that is just the end game. That is, define a large hiding zone and then just try to find someone in it using the questions from this book, or maybe just a subset of them for added challenge. The rulebook also includes this variant for playing with multiple teams of seekers, all trying to find the hider the fastest. And then on the final pages of the rulebook, they also outline how you might be able to play a global game of hide and seek. But they make it very clear they don't think you should do it. And then, of course, we can't talk about variants of this game without talking about this whole entire deck of blank cards that's included in the box. Because the Jetlag team actively encourages you to tweak the rules, come up with your own cards, your own questions. Tailor the game to the area in which you are playing it. So while I will absolutely try to answer your rules-related questions in the comments of this video, just know that you are completely free, and it's part of the game, in fact, to change it at your will to make it more fun for your group. Like Adam from Jetlag the Game has gone on record saying he would consider allowing the questions where you need to trace out streets in your hiding zone to not necessarily be oriented to north-south. And he's also stated that for many players it might be a good idea to just leave that infamous move card out of the deck completely, so as to not spend a lot of time waiting for that. I certainly also have some ideas for what to use these blank cards for, but the basic message here is don't be afraid to remove a card from the deck, for example, if you don't like it. It is completely within the spirit of the game to play however you like. I want to touch a little bit more upon this rule book because even though it has a lot of pages and is very detailed about explaining every question and every different card, there are still some things that are a little bit ambiguous. And I get that that is hard to avoid when the game takes place in the real world, infamously very hard to classify and put into boxes place. But still, some of this could have been a little better described or better segmented. Just for an example, this is how the rulebook describes how you're allowed to hide as your final hiding spot. Your hiding spot must be within 10 feet of a marked path or road on the map apps that you're using for your game. No wandering off into the wilderness or swimming out to sea. Viable paths and roads should be easy to discern on any map, but if there's any question as to whether one counts, the test is whether or not your map app will use them for walking directions. In other words, the seeker should be able to theoretically follow a route generated by the app to within 10 feet of your hiding spot. Now, I appreciate that this definition is as solid as it is, but even this definition kind of invites questions like, okay, but then am I allowed to hide indoors or underground, such as in a metro station or at Narita airport? But these sorts of problems of trying to categorize things from the real world and put them into boxes and say what is and what is not a bridge, for instance. Where do we draw the line between a bridge and a tunnel? The rulebook also tries to explain that. Even if these ambiguities are bound to exist, I don't think that this is really a big cause for concern, because in all likelihood, most of the people who are going to be playing this game are going to already trust each other to make the right call, or at least to make a good faith attempt at doing curses or correctly answering questions. The more important question, especially for a game like this with incomplete information, is how do we make sure that nobody accidentally cheats? That is, how do we make sure that the hider doesn't accidentally give out an incomplete or wrong answer to a question asked by the seekers? Because that could ruin the entire game, to be quite frank. The rulebook does take this concern into account, and it does so by putting the responsibility on the seekers to make their questions as clear as possible. Basically, the seekers do all the work of taking screenshots of the map, taking screenshots of lists of stations for a train line, sending coordinates to the hider so that the hider is as unlikely as possible to misunderstand or accidentally answer incorrectly. I think that's a good way to go about this problem, because with this system, ultimately, if the answer that you get is not formulated in the way that you were expecting, it is your fault as the seeker for not asking the question in a precise enough way. And while we're on the topic of conveying information in a precise and clear way, I have a couple of gripes with the way that this rule book is laid out. The booklet starts out with this section called Quick Start Guide, and you would assume that the Quick Start Guide would give you a brief overview of what the game is going to be. And then it also makes sense that it thereafter goes into more details about each part of the gameplay. At a certain point, though, the Quick Start Guide does go into a weird amount of specificity when it comes to the rules of the game. And in fact, there are plenty of rules that are only found in this Quick Start Guide and not in the sections where you would maybe think to look if you were later going back to find it. Rules about hiding, for example, are kind of split between the section about hiding and the Quick Start Guide. And it's not really obvious why certain things are in one section over the other. Now, don't get me wrong, if you read through the whole rule book, you will know all the rules. But if you don't remember them and you want to look something up, say, how long does the hider get to hide? What is the hiding period? Then, well, you don't find that by looking in the hiding section. You find that in the quick start section. But mostly this is information that you would probably make sure you know before you start playing. So in that sense, it's okay. At the very least, all of the pages about different curses, questions, and cards are all together in their own sections. And those are probably the ones you're going to be mostly looking up during the game. The rulebook also never really tells you what to do when it tells you to discard a card. It's just sort of implied that you know what that means. So like, do you put the discarded cards and the used cards in their own pile, like separate from your hand and the one you draw from? Or do you maybe shuffle them back into the pile that you draw from? Do you put them at the bottom of the pile that you draw from? It's not clear, but as far as I understand at least, you put them in a separate pile and you only shuffle them all together when a new player or a new team gets to be the hider. Apart from that, there are a couple of curses and questions that require you to do some quite involved information gathering in order to, well, answer them or fulfill them, like figuring out the MSRP value of a car that you find parked on the street, or determining what is and is not a high-speed train line. The rulebook says that different countries sometimes have different definitions of high-speed rail, so it's worth using whatever definition is locally applicable, and then it lists out the entire EU definition for high-speed rail. It seems like a lot, so perhaps that one is something you'll have to just decide before you start playing. What is and is not high-speed rail? And while we're talking about the rules, I do want to appreciate the fact that the rules writers seem to have been very conscientious of the fact that this game takes place in the real world with people in it. And that comes with some concerns that aren't so easily abstracted away by rules. It's nice to see that the rules encourage players to stay safe and mindful of their own well-being, as well as not being a nuisance to other people in the space where they are playing the game. And I also like that the general tips section of the rule book has rules in place for taking emergency breaks or guidelines for playing with younger players, or just simply creating a game map where every player feels comfortable playing. This thoughtfulness is something I've always liked about the show, and I really appreciate that it also shines through in the rulebook for this game. So, the question we've all been asking for, should you buy this game? And well, to answer that question, there is one more topic we need to discuss, and that is the price of it. This is a pretty limited production with limited warehouses storing it, so that does affect the price. It certainly did when I bought it. When I bought this copy back in November, the price was prohibitively high. I would not have recommended you buy it back then unless you were a real fan of Jetlag the game, or you lived in the US where the price was not as high because of shipping prices. Now though, as the metric edition of this game was announced, another warehouse in Europe was also announced, which means that now prices are pretty low even here outside of the US. We're talking regular board game prices now. It's still limited print, and in fact, right now as I'm recording this in April 2025, you still would have to wait until May or June to actually receive your copy. But unless you're in Asia or Oceania maybe, I would say the price of this box is not a limiting factor anymore. As I said earlier though, this box is not the only thing you'll have to buy to play this game. Just to reiterate, you also will have to buy transit passes for every single player, for every single day that you're playing. And I didn't mention this before, but there are also curses that require you to buy stuff in order to clear them, such as the curse of the egg partner. But remember, you can add or remove any cards you like, so this is not a big problem. So, should you buy this game? Well, I would say the price is fair. So what it really comes down to is, are you a fan of Jetlag the game? Would you like this just because of that? Would you like to play it? If then, you'll have to find people to play it with, pay for day passes to your local transit system, stuff like that. If considering that this is something that you would like to own, if it's within your price range, I'd say go for it. Although, take that with a grain of salt. Admittedly, I did say I haven't played it yet, but if you subscribe, maybe you'll see me playing it before too long. In any case, I hope you feel sufficiently informed about this game after watching this video. That was, after all, the goal. If you enjoyed this type of nerdy deep dive into Jetlag the game, then you might be interested in watching some of the other videos on my channel. This past year or so, I have been making videos analyzing the trailers for each upcoming season, looking at all the locations shown in them and seeing if I can piece it all together into a prediction as to what happens. If you like what I do here, you can become a channel member. The link for more info is in the description. Also in the description is a link to the spreadsheet I mentioned before with all the different cards and the distribution explained. You can see a scanned, digitized copy of the rulebook, as well as any other helpful game-related links that I can think to put down there. I think I saw that somebody actually made a little Webtool you can use while playing it. I do believe that is all I had to say about this box here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget that's great. Have a nice day, and bye-bye.
He's the mayor of Lonely Town, population 1. Population 1. Staring a hole in the ground, staring at nothing.